Okay. Hello. Shall we? Hello everyone, my name is Schwarz. I'm iOS platform lead in STRV, and today I will be talking about SceneDelegates that were introduced in iOS 13. I do have my own presentation tool. First of all, let me say 2 sentences about STRV. It's pretty funny because I just found out that STRV collaborated with Sparks. When I saw the Christian mingle on the slide, I realized that we collaborated on that. But STRV is a Czech company. It's based in Prague and Brno. Right now we have around 150 developers, out of which 40 are iOS developers, which is pretty many. So we have a lot of knowledge in the team, and we believe that it's important to share knowledge. So we organize meetups in Prague, in Brno, and we also attend meetups around Europe, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here today. So, it broke. Give me a second. Well, if it doesn't work, then let's go to manual.
Hey Siri.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the topic, and the topic is scenes. First of all, motivation. Why were even scenes introduced? Because, like, you know, there was a perfectly working ecosystem, so why the scenes were introduced? And the reason was this. Approximately 2 years ago, Apple announced they want to bring UIKit to macOS. Originally it was called Project Marzipan, then it was announced on the last WWDC 2019 as the Project Catalyst. But yeah, they decided to bring UIKit to macOS, and it had some consequences, and they had to face them and to solve them. One of it was this thing. On iOS, on iPhone, when you run your app, you have just one instance of your app. But if you have an app on macOS, it means that you can typically open more than one window of your app, which used to not be supported on iOS, and they had to solve it somehow. So they started to solving it, and someone realized, well, iPad is also a pretty big device, and you can fit 2 windows next to each other, side by side. Plus, we have the split view where you can run like 2 windows of different apps. So why not to have 2 windows of one app? So if we are doing it on macOS, we should support it also on iPadOS. And then someone realized, okay, we can utilize it, and ta-da, we have iPadOS. What is iPadOS? iPadOS is basically iOS on steroids only, because if you go to settings, you can see that the version number is still the same, and the updates are coming together. So it's just iOS with additional features like Apple Pencil, slide over, the split view, and now multiple windows of single app. Okay, that was a short tour of the history. Now let's get to the lifecycle updates, because obviously when you want to support more windows, you have to update the lifecycle. That didn't count with that. So let's move on. This is the situation in iOS 12. It was pretty straightforward. We have one application, we have a window, and this is the main window, and the window has a root view controller. But in iOS 13, we need to somehow add more windows. Well, we could do it by keeping an array of windows, obviously, but this is not very nice. Plus, let's imagine that you have the UI methods in your application delegate, like application that become active, application will resign active. Like, what does it mean if you have no windows? Because it doesn't make any sense, because typically only one window will become active or will resign active, etc. So there would be many complications, and Apple decided to do it in a different way, more elegant way, and they added 2 pieces into this chain. One is UIWindowScene, or UI scene in general, which is equivalent to an instance of your UI. So if you have more instances of UI, more windows, you have more scenes, more UI window scenes. Because those scenes have to be managed somehow from the application delegate, you have also the scene session. Scene session is a normal session with some states, and when, for example, like the reason why the session is there is that when a system needs memory, it deallocates your UI, but it can deallocate only UI of one window, but application needs to keep track of existing UI so that it can request the reallocation when you reopen the app. So that's the reason for having the session. The session exists exists when the UI is deallocated, and when the app is reopened, then the application knows that UI needs to be allocated again. So this is how it looks when you have two windows in your app. Well, this is one app, you have one application, but the application manages two sessions. The sessions manages their scenes. The scenes have their main windows, and the windows have direct view controllers. Now let's move on to the application delegate. This is how it looks in iOS 12. The application delegate takes care of the app lifecycle, like app launch, app terminated, but also the UI lifecycle, like did become active, did enter background. And as I mentioned, as I said, this doesn't make sense anymore because it tells that the whole app did become active, but we need to separate between the scenes. So what happened is that application delegate kept just the app lifecycle methods, but the UI lifecycle methods were extracted, and they were extracted to SceneDelegate. What is SceneDelegate? Well, UI application has UIApplicationDelegate, and UI scene has UISceneDelegate. So this is equivalent for the scenes, and because scene is equivalent of the instance of the UI, it keeps track or takes care of the UI lifecycle methods. So all the did become active, did enter background were moved to the SceneDelegate. Now, to be completely clear, completely honest, the application delegate also gained one functionality, one responsibility, and it is scene session lifecycle management. Because, as I showed on the previous slide, there are the scene sessions, and those scene sessions are managed by application delegate. So the application delegate takes care of the scene sessions as well. This is the whole life cycle. The black pieces are in the application delegate, the red pieces are in the scene delegate. So when your app is launched, the traditional did finish launching is called, but then we need an UI. So the method scene session configuration is called in the application delegate, so you are supposed to provide the configuration for a new scene. Then the scene session is created and a scene is constructed, like the scene delegate is initialized. Then will connect scene session is called in the scene delegate. This is pretty much equivalent of the did finish launching for the application delegate. Then there is the whole loop, like well-known loop of UI methods, will enter program, they become active, etc., etc. When system deallocates the UI, did disconnect scene is called, but this doesn't mean that the session is also destroyed. The session can still be alive, or probably is still alive, until the point when the user explicitly kills the scene, closes the scene somehow. And when the user closes the scene, then discard scene session method is called in your application delegate. Well, it's pretty straightforward, pretty elegant, pretty simple, but it has some consequences. So let's talk about them. First of all, there is new attribute in InfoPList. It's called scene manifest, and you have to fill in configurations that for your scenes that are supported in your app. Well, me personally, I don't like it because it's a string identifier, it's error-prone, but that's how it is. So you are supposed to fill in the configuration name and the class name for your scene delegate. Then there are those new methods in the application delegate for managing scene sessions. So the first one is called when new scene session is created, and you are supposed to provide it with the configuration. You basically tell, I want to create a scene with this configuration, and as we filled in the scene manifest, the SceneDelegate is tied to the configuration. So you have to fill in the string identifier, and that's the point I don't like, but that's how it is. And when the scene is being destroyed, this discard scene session is called. It's not just one session, it's not a single instance, it can be a set, like if those sessions have been destroyed during your app being in suspended mode or whatever. Another addition, or like the addition is the SceneDelegate, as I'm talking, and yeah, it's pretty clear. You have the will-connect method and the disconnect method. Those methods are called during creation or destruction, respectively. And then you have all those UI methods that you used to have in your application delegate. More serious thing is that a few notifications were renamed. So I guess that in a lot of your view controllers, you listen to or you observe to these notifications, like application did become active to update your UI once your app goes to foreground. Well, these notifications were renamed, so from iOS 13 you are supposed to listen to different notification names, which is not like a huge obstacle, but you should be aware of it. Another thing is that application delegate doesn't have window property anymore. I hope you don't have this line of code in your app because it's very ugly, but if you do, it won't work. Then, last but not least, shared resources. Right now, you could assume that you have just one instance of one specific view controller, because this view controller is only on one place in your app. And you can assume that like you have only one instance that can access your shared resource. Well, from now on, if you support multiple windows, you must take into account that there could be more than one instance of the view controller, and that more than one instance can access your shared resource at the same time. So just bear it in your mind. Now you could think, like, what should I do? Those are some complicated updates, and there is a new life cycle. So, like, how should I react to it? How should I update my existing app? How should I face my new project? Well, you have basically three options. First option is take the lean approach and keep the old life cycle. It requires that you don't want to support the multiple windows because you have the old lifecycle that doesn't support it. But then it's pretty straightforward. You just don't have the scene manifest in your info list. You don't have the methods like the scene session management methods in your application delegate. And if you meet these preconditions, then the system keeps calling the old lifecycle methods. But we don't know for how long it will last. Second option is to have deployment target greater than or equal to 13. If you can provide it, that you are lucky. And the only thing you need to do is basically move the the code from the UI methods from the application delegate to the scene delegate. You need to observe different notification names, but that's pretty much it. It's pretty straightforward, so it needs just a little bit of work, and then you can just profit from it. And the third option is to implement both. So if you need to support iOS 12 and you want to implement multiple windows, then you need to support both lifecycles, which means that you have to implement both lifecycle methods or both versions of lifecycle methods, which leads to some duplication, but it means that you duplicate just the definitions of the method, and if you write your app in a good manner, then you don't duplicate the implementation itself because you do it only on one place and you call it from those methods. So it's more complicated, but it should be okay. So I hope that I kind of comforted you that it's not such a huge change, and our lives will be as awesome as it is right now. And let's take a short detour And let's talk about state restoration. What I mean by state restoration, state restoration, well, let's imagine that user opens an app and then he closes it, the app is suspended, system needs more memory, so it deallocates it, and when the user reopens the app, he or she expects that he or she would be on the same screen where they left. But if there is no state restoration, your app is reinitialized and the user is on the first screen of your app, which is not the best user experience. Now the question for you, can you move on? Well, who of you has ever implemented state restoration in your app? Oh, good for you. No, it's really good to have it there, but in iOS 12 there is native support, but it's kind of ugly. It uses NSCoder and it's like MVC based. It's separated for every view controller, so you save the state of every view controller separately, and then it's restored also separately. So if you don't want to have your app in MVC, then it's kind of difficult to use this native way. Well, luckily in iOS 13 it was changed, and right now it looks like this. There is a method in the SceneDelegate called state restoration activity, and you are supposed to return an NS user activity object that captures the state of the whole scene. Well, an advantage of this is that like you store the state of the whole scene, so it's architecture agnostic, I would say. On the other hand, it's just one object for the whole scene, so it can get pretty huge, and it could be complicated to store the state of the whole scene in one object. Plus, it is NS user activity, and yeah, I personally don't like NS user activities, but that's up to you. But like, don't be sad, because it has also its perks. Like, NS user activity is common for the whole new lifecycle. And if you move to the next slide, yeah, this is it. You can also benefit from it. Well, if you implement the state restoration with NS user activity, you can use these three properties. It's eligible for search, it's eligible for prediction, and is eligible for handoff. So basically, if you implement the state restoration and you set these to true, you out of the box implement handoff functionality. This state can be searched in a spotlight, and if user taps on the item in the spotlight, your app is opened at this state, like if you implement it, but you have to implement for a state restoration. And third, this item is also emerges as a suggestion for Siri. So if you implement state restoration and set these to true, you have like 3 functionalities out of the box in your app. Let's move on to the core, which is the multiple window support. The first question is, like, when should I support multiple windows? Where should I offer it to the user? The answer is, go on, like, whenever it makes sense. Whenever you have a detail and you want to compare it side by side, whenever user wants to copy something from one screen to another, whenever you have some editing in your app and like user would like to edit it side by side. It's like if you use your common sense, you will come up with the good, with the best practices. One important thing is that you are supposed to open a new scene, to create a new scene only upon user's explicit action. So like only if it is clear to user that he is opening new scene, you should open or you should request opening the new scene. Now, small intermezzo, like thanks to Apple, I got inspired by Apple that every presentation must have some awkward demo. So this is my awkward demo. Goulash Club is a group of friends in Prague, and every month we go to a restaurant that offers goulash on their menu. And the group has goulash, and then we rate the goulash, like what the sauce was and how the meat was, and we put the overall rating. So this is our large club group, and like this group needs its own app. So like this is my demo app, list of large places and like their details, ratings, etc., etc. If you want to support multiple windows, the first thing you need to do is to enable a checkbox. And if you do so, you suddenly can support multiple windows and you get one functionality completely for free. And this is it. Yeah, it runs. Like if you open the dock and you just drag your app icon over the existing instance, it creates the second instance of your app, or like the second scene of your app. And this is completely for free after you enable the checkbox in the build settings. That's pretty nice, pretty neat. One disadvantage is that it opens like the second full instance of your app, and you don't need this all the times. Like as I mentioned, user probably wants to just compare two details or so. So maybe it's just enough to open only the restaurant detail in the second scene. To do so, you need to do more work. Let's move on. Let's move back, sorry. First option is like through an explicit action. There is, can you go back and forth to restart? And yeah, to restart the animation. Oh, yeah, there is a button, like the book icon on the top right. And that's our explicit action. So if user taps on the button, he or she requests like opening the detail in the new scene, and the new scene is, the detail is opened in the new window, and it's only the detail, not the whole UI flow, just the detail. And to do so, we need to support this new scene because it's like different scene than the default one. Let's move on. First thing we need to do is to add the new scene or the new configuration to the info plist. So like define new name and define the delegate class name, like SceneDelegate class name. Then we have to create the SceneDelegate as well. Then we need to support it in the application delegate. So in the configuration for connecting method, we need to return the new configuration. So based on the connection options, we can decide which scene we want to create. Like there are, again, user activities in those options. So based on the user activities, we can decide like whether we want to create the detail scene or the default scene. And when the user taps on the button, we need to request the new scene. There is a method on UI application called request scene session activation with multiple parameters. First one is the session. So let's imagine that user has already opened the second scene with detail of restaurant, and then he or she wants to open the same detail again. Well, it doesn't make sense to create it again. So if there is an existing session, basically the same session, you can pass it here. If you pass nil, new session and new scene is created. And then you pass user activity. That's the activity you will get in the configuration method in the application delegate. So you need to put there some descriptive activity type, and you can use also the user info to describe it well, so that you can tell in the application delegate like which scene you want to create. When user taps on cancel, when user wants to close the scene, you also on the UI application you call request scene session destruction. Here you need to have a reference to the session. You pass it as a parameter, and in the options you can specify the animation for destruction. So like there is standard and commit, like if the scene ends successfully, like for example if email is sent, or if user during typing of the email taps on cancel, it's like there is this destructive animation. The last like standard thing how to create a new scene is by dragging, and most typically it's like dragging an item from a collection, here from a table view. You just drag the item to the edge of your screen and the new scene is created. What we need to do to implement this It's also really straightforward. Like in this case, we have table view, so we just conform to UI table view drag delegate. And when the dragon starts, we create an instance of its user activity again with some activity type that is descriptive for the scene with any user info. Then we instantiate the NS item provider and we provide it to UI drag item. And that's it. Like when we drag items like this to the edge screen, the system will take care of everything. A new scene is created, and the user activity is passed to the configuration method in the application delegate. Last short topic is targeting specific scene, because if you imagine that your app wants to receive a push notification, like this is the situation in iOS 12. Very simply, you receive a notification, user taps on notification, application is opened, the respective method in application delegate is called, and the user interface is updated respectively. In iOS 13, it is more complicated because you can have more instances of your UI. So how to do it, like how the system knows which instance of UI or which scene it should open. Well, like the most straightforward solution would be to call call your application and to ask like which scene do you want to open. But Apple wanted to avoid this because like if your app is suspended and it's like primarily allocated, it would need to load the whole application to memory. Plus, then it must provide you some time to decide like which scene you want to open. So they wanted to avoid this, so they decided for a different solution. And it looks like this, that the notification has some content description. It is a string that is like descriptive enough to provide information like what is the content of the notification. The application is taken away from the whole flow, and then there are only the scenes, and the scenes describe their capabilities. If we move on, the content description looks like this. It's not only the notification, but the same situation is for a shortcut item and also for user activities connected to like opening your app, for example, with the handoff or with the spotlight search, etc., etc. But all these objects have one thing in common, one property in common, and that's the target content identifier. That's the string description of the content of the object. On the other hand, there are the scenes, which describe their capabilities, and each scene has activation conditions object with two properties. One is can activate for target content identifier predicate. The second one is prefers to activate for content target content identifier predicate. Both are predicates, so it's as suggested from the name. And yeah, the name is pretty descriptive. So the first one can activate for target content identifier means that this scene can handle the notification, like let's talk about notifications. So this scene can handle the notification, which doesn't necessarily mean that it wants to handle the notification. So there is the second one that is prefers to activate for target content identifier. This is like more detailed, and it says like whenever notification with this content comes, I want to handle it. Like this is my expertise. And yeah, if there are more than one scene with similar, or like if it is ambiguous, like which scene to open, the behavior is not specified, but it's like I observed that it opens the last scene opened that can handle the content. And that's it for me. This is the list of the resources. It's mostly WWDC videos, some articles, and short summary. Move on. Short summary. I want to encourage you to embrace the new lifecycle because it's pretty easy and like nobody knows for how long the system will keep calling the old lifecycle methods. I want to encourage you to implement the state restoration because it's also not so difficult, plus you can benefit from it and users will appreciate it. And I want to ask you to consider like supporting multiple windows if it makes sense for your app, because that's new functionality we got from Apple, so we can use it. And one warning, like in iOS 13, it's still pretty buggy, so don't be surprised when it doesn't work. The demo you can find at this URL at my GitHub, and thank you for your attention. Any questions?
So why did Apple decided not to go with an array of UI windows, but an array of UI SceneDelegate? If you know.
Well, I don't know, but like it makes sense for me. That, like, as I mentioned in the beginning, there were the problems with the UI lifecycle methods in your application delegate, because it doesn't make sense anymore to have UI lifecycle methods tied to the whole application. The whole application to become active, because now only one scene becomes active. So they wanted to separate the UI methods from the app methods. So that's the reason why they created the scene delegate, like they separated the functionality between the UI application delegate and scene delegate. And then they added the sessions because, like, for the management reasons.
But not to argue, of course, but passing the window, the window that gets action wouldn't solve the problem.
Yeah, like
users aren't active and passing that window as a parameter.
You can also have in previous versions of iOS, you have multiple windows as well. If you connect a second, like a cable to use a second screen, for example. So you already had an array of UI windows. So I think they have to change it because it would have not worked with that system.
Like, that would be also a way to have an array of windows, and then you would pass the window as a parameter to some methods, but that they decided to go this way. I don't know the reason behind it. Any other question? Yes?
Can you give an example of any issue? Because you said that right now it's still very buggy. What kind of issues have you found?
Well, first of all, when I said that if you implement the state restoration, you get the handoff functionality for free. Well, you do, but there is the target content identifier on the NS user activity, and this doesn't work. So you cannot target a specific scene with the handoff functionality. That's one thing, for example. The second thing is with the state restoration, it's probably only when you use it in the simulator, but there is the method in the SceneDelegate that is like where you provide the user activity that captures the whole state. But you need to send your app to background, only if you send the app to background, the system asks for the user activity. So if you run it on the simulator and you just stop running the app, this method is never called. So like there is no state captured. And yeah, there are multiple else. For example, like the target content identifier on the shortcut item is not marked as iOS 13 and later. So it allows you to build it with iOS 12, but then it crashes. That's
did you work on any weird projects with different scenes?
For now, like I have only this demo project, because like in our company we have many apps, but yeah, like we decided like because of like the buggy behavior, and those are things that I discovered, but I don't know if there are any more serious bugs. So we decided to postpone the support of multiple scenes to iOS 14.
Like in this phase of trying out, did you already think about which data layer paths to share between different scenes? Because like if I have a login, I guess I should be logged in every scene.
Yeah.
But if I load a newsfeed, it should only be in one of the scenes. Like if I have Twitter in both scenes, I reload one timeline. I don't want the other timeline to be reloaded.
Oh,
But if I
that's-
log out, I should be logged out everywhere, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting user case or use case. Well, I like, even though you can have multiple scenes, you have still just one application. So every shared resource is the same for the whole application, and I think it should be like this. So if you log in at one scene or in one scene, it's like logging for the whole application. So like when you are one user on one scene, then it means that you are the same user on the second screen. And like if I answered your question, I know.
No, the question was if you touch this point, but I heard no, so.
Depends on how you architect it.
Any other question? Well, if no, thank you again for your attention.